The glass tower of Kane International loomed over Manhattan like a monument to power, its mirrored walls catching the sunlight and throwing it back onto the streets below. Inside, on the 42nd floor, the atmosphere was tense, the air so heavy with unease that even the steady hum of the city seemed muted. Employees gathered in the sleek conference room, their eyes fixed on the man at the head of the long oak table, Richard Kane. Richard adjusted his silk tie with deliberate precision. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence demanded attention, though the coldness in his eyes kept warmth at bay. "Listen carefully," he began, his voice cutting through the silence like steel. "This company has been carrying far too much dead weight. Times are changing, and I won't tolerate inefficiency. If you can't prove your worth, consider this your warning. You'll be out." A collective shiver rippled through the room. People glanced at one another nervously, mothers and fathers who depended on these jobs to pay rent, buy groceries, send their children to school. A young accountant swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she scribbled notes. A manager clenched his jaw, staring at the table to avoid Kane's piercing gaze. At the far edge of the room, unnoticed as always, Angela Brown polished the silver door handle until it gleamed. Her uniform was neatly pressed, her hair tucked under a simple scarf, her expression calm and unreadable. Years of cleaning offices like this one had taught her the art of invisibility, but invisibility did not mean she was deaf. She heard every word, every sharp edge of Richard Kane's threat. Angela moved slowly, deliberately, collecting coffee cups and wiping the fingerprints off the glass table. To the executives, she was background, silent, unimportant. Yet in her apron pocket, nestled deep inside, was a letter sealed in an envelope worn soft from her touch. She had carried it for days, weighing its importance with each heartbeat. As Richard spoke, her eyes drifted to him, her thoughts unspoken. This man who commanded billions, whose name was whispered in the halls of power, had no idea that a simple maid held something capable of shaking his empire. He leaned back in his leather chair, his tone sharp with disdain. "Don't expect sympathy from me. We are not here to coddle anyone. If this company is to stay on top, sacrifices must be made. Those unwilling to adapt will be replaced." Angela's fingers brushed the envelope through the fabric of her apron. She thought of her grandson, Marcus, a bright 17-year-old with dreams of studying engineering, dreams she refused to let die in the shadow of hardship. She thought of her late sister, whose memory lived in every fold of that letter, whose truth was yet to be heard. The room erupted into whispers as Richard stood, signaling the meeting was over. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, and employees exchanged worried glances. Fear clung to the walls like smoke, seeping into every corner. Yet Angela remained composed, her steady hands continuing their quiet work, her mind already turning toward the moment she would no longer be silent. For now she stayed in the background, unseen but ever present. The storm was only beginning, and soon Richard Kane would learn that power was not as untouchable as he believed. And if you've been drawn into this story already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because Angela's decision will not only change her life, but also the lives of everyone around her. Angela adjusted her cleaning cart, her steps soft against the polished floor as the room emptied. The echoes of Richard's threat still lingered, but so did the steady beat of her resolve. Hidden within that single envelope was the power to turn his words back against him. Outside the glass windows, New York pulsed with restless energy, taxi horns, footsteps, voices rising and falling in the streets. The city was alive, relentless, full of people chasing survival, ambition, and hope. Angela belonged to that rhythm, grounded by her community, carrying within her the strength of Harlem, the prayers of her church, the wisdom of those who came before. She paused for a moment at the door, glancing back at the pristine conference room where fear still hung in the air. Her eyes softened with quiet determination. Kane thought he had control, thought his threats would crush spirits. He was wrong. Angela whispered under her breath, a vow only she could hear. "You don't know me yet, Mr. Kane. But you will." And with that she stepped into the hallway, her figure disappearing among the hum of corporate life. carrying with her a secret that would soon unravel the empire of a man who believed himself untouchable. The subway screeched to a stop as Angela stepped off, her handbag clutched close against her side. She climbed the cracked stairs to 125th Street, where Harlem spread before her in all its restless energy. The autumn air carried the scent of fried chicken from a corner diner mixed with the sweet smoke of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart. Neon signs flickered against the fading daylight, and the sound of children laughing as they chased a basketball across the sidewalk echoed above the rush of traffic. Angela inhaled deeply. Here, she wasn't just the quiet maid in a billionaire's office. She was part of something living, a thread in a community stitched together by struggle, pride, and perseverance. Every face she passed, neighbors, shopkeepers, elders perched on stoops, reminded her who she was and what she carried with her. At the corner, she stopped at Johnson's barber shop. Inside, men debated sports and politics with equal passion, their voices rising and falling like a familiar song. "Angie," called out Mr. Johnson, the barber, flashing her a grin from behind his chair. "How you holding up, sister?" She smiled faintly, slipping inside for a moment's rest. "One day at a time," she answered. "Work don't stop, you know that." The barber shop erupted in laughter and knowing nods. They all understood. Long hours, little thanks, but always pushing forward. Further down, Angela passed Miss Clara's soul kitchen, the scent of collard greens and cornbread wafting through the open door. Clara herself waved from behind the counter, her gold bangles jingling. "Angela, bring Marcus by soon, baby. I'll fix him a plate." "I'll do that," Angela replied warmly. Her grandson loved Clara's peach cobbler, and the thought of his smile brought a flicker of light to her weary eyes. She turned down a quieter street, the noise fading into a softer hum. In her small apartment, Marcus waited with his textbooks spread across the kitchen table. Angela had raised him since her daughter's passing, pouring every ounce of love and sacrifice into his future. His dream was to study engineering at Howard University. Every late night she worked, every floor she scrubbed, every aching muscle carried that goal. As she unlocked the door, Marcus looked up, his face brightening. "Grandma, I think I figured out the physics problem. Want to see?" Angela leaned over his notebook, her eyes softening. "Baby, I don't know much about all them formulas, but I know you're going to do great things. Don't let nothing stop you." He grinned, pride glowing in his features. "I won't." Angela stepped into the small bedroom afterward, setting her handbag on the dresser. She reached inside, pulling out the envelope she kept hidden from Marcus. The paper was creased from her constant touch, the seal still intact. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it in silence. Her sister's handwriting on the front stirred memories, laughter in the kitchen years ago, whispered conversations late at night, tears shared after long shifts. She whispered to the still air, "Lord, guide me. Tell me when it's time." Slipping the letter back into her bag, she returned to the kitchen. Marcus was already lost in equations, his pencil tapping the paper in rhythm with his thoughts. Angela smiled faintly, hiding her weariness. For him, she would carry this weight until the moment was right. Outside, Harlem's rhythm continued. Cars honking, music spilling from open windows, footsteps hurrying along cracked sidewalks. Angela belonged to that rhythm, her strength rooted in the soil of her community. And though her day had been long, her resolve only deepened. Tomorrow she would return to Kane International, once again invisible in polished halls. But tonight, within the heart of Harlem, she was whole. Richard Kane's office rose above Manhattan like a throne perched on clouds, its walls lined with shelves of rare books and trophies that glistened in the morning light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park below, the trees painted in shades of orange and gold as autumn settled over the city. Yet the beauty outside only magnified the cold sterility within. The air smelled faintly of leather and polish, not life. Richard stood at his desk, scanning reports with a sharp frown. Every chart, every number represented control, and he demanded precision from all of it. He had built Kane International from a small trading firm into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The story was repeated often, the poor kid from Brooklyn who clawed his way to the top, shaking hands with governors and presidents along the way. What the story never mentioned was how many people he had stepped on to get there. His assistant, Laura Green, entered quietly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "The board wants reassurances," she said. "They're nervous about the layoffs. They don't want unnecessary disruption." Richard didn't look up. "The board will get what I give them. Fear is a tool, Laura. It keeps people moving." She hesitated, then asked, "And the people you cut? What happens to them?" He finally lifted his eyes, his stare cold. "They'll survive or they won't. Either way, it's not my concern." Laura bit her lip but said nothing more. She had seen this side of him before, the ruthless conviction that numbers mattered more than people. Still, a flicker of doubt lingered in her chest. Meanwhile, whispers ran through the building's lower floors. In the break room, employees spoke in hushed tones, their coffee cups trembling in nervous hands. A young man muttered, "I just bought a house. If I lose this job, I don't know how I'll make it." A woman added, "My daughter starts college next year. What am I supposed to tell her?" The fear spread like wildfire, every conversation shadowed by Richard's warning. And while executives scrambled to prove their worth, others simply tried to keep breathing under the weight of uncertainty. Angela, pushing her cart down the gleaming hallways, caught fragments of these conversations. She saw the slumped shoulders, the restless eyes, the silent prayers whispered when no one was looking. Though she was not part of their meetings, she understood the fear better than most. She had lived her whole life with the risk of losing everything hovering just above her. Richard, however, remained untouched by such vulnerability. In his mind, the company was a machine, and machines required efficiency. He often told investors, "Weak links slow us down." The phrase had become almost a mantra, one he repeated so often that he no longer saw the humanity hidden behind the term weak link. Later that afternoon, he hosted a private lunch with 2 board members in his office. Fine wine gleamed in crystal glasses, and a tray of imported cheeses lay untouched between them. One board member leaned forward. "Richard, you've built something remarkable here, but the press won't ignore a mass firing. Public perception matters." Richard smirked. "Public perception bends to results. When profits soar, no one cares about the noise along the way." The other board member chuckled nervously, though unease flickered in his eyes. Richard lifted his glass, his voice smooth and assured. "Gentlemen, this company is an empire, and empires aren't built by kindness. They're built by strength, by decisions others are too afraid to make." As he spoke, Angela entered quietly to clear the side table. She moved with practiced silence, but her ears caught every word. Richard didn't glance at her, not even once. To him, she was no more than the furniture, present but irrelevant. Yet as she pushed her cart out of the room, Angela's grip tightened on the handle. Every word Richard uttered only deepened her conviction that his empire wasn't as untouchable as he believed. And somewhere in the quiet of her heart, she knew the day was coming when he would have no choice but to see her. The next morning, Angela's cart squeaked softly as she rolled it across the polished hallway of Kane International. Her shoes tapped against marble floors that reflected the fluorescent lights above. To most people hurrying past in their pressed suits, she was barely noticeable. A uniform, a mop, a woman blending into the background. Yet she saw everything. Angela paused to straighten a stack of magazines in the waiting area, listening as 2 secretaries whispered nearby. "I heard 10 people from accounting might be cut next," one said, her voice trembling. The other sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I've got 2 kids in daycare. If I lose this job—" Her words trailed into silence. Angela's heart tightened. She had walked that road of uncertainty many times, juggling bills, praying that lights stayed on, that Marcus never felt the weight of what she carried alone. As she continued her work, she passed the security desk, where Darnell, a tall black guard with tired eyes, greeted her warmly. "Morning, Miss Angela. You doing okay?" She smiled, her shoulders easing a little. "I'm hanging in there, Darnell." "Same as you." "Same as all of us," he replied, shaking his head. These small exchanges reminded her she wasn't entirely invisible. Among the janitors, cafeteria staff, and guards, there was a quiet fellowship, a shared resilience that executives never noticed. They saw one another even when others didn't. Later in the day, Angela found herself in the copy room, dusting shelves and wiping fingerprints from the machines. The door creaked open, and a young man stepped inside. His suit was a little too big, the sleeves hanging loose at the wrists. His tie was slightly crooked. He looked nervous, clutching a folder like it was armor. "Excuse me," he said, offering a polite smile. "Do you know where the HR office is?" Angela studied him for a moment, recognizing the same anxious energy she had once seen in Marcus before his first big school presentation. "Down the hall, second door on the left," she answered gently. "Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated, then asked, "You work here long?" "Long enough to know the people who clean the floors notice more than the ones sitting behind the desks," she replied with a faint chuckle. The young man laughed nervously, then extended his hand. "I'm Malik Johnson. First week here. Internship in finance." Angela shook his hand, her eyes softening. "Angela Brown. Welcome, Malik. Keep your head high, baby. Places like this will try to make you feel small, but don't let them." Malik's expression shifted from nervous to thoughtful. "Yes, ma'am. I'll remember that." As he left, Angela felt a warmth linger in her chest. The boy reminded her of Marcus, bright, full of promise, carrying dreams that stretched far beyond these glass walls. That afternoon, she moved quietly through the executive wing, cleaning offices while the higher-ups debated numbers behind closed doors. She noticed how the same men who ignored her presence lowered their voices when she passed, as if her ears didn't work because her job was to clean. They didn't realize she carried their words with her, piece by piece, stitching together truths they thought invisible. Back at her cart, she paused, her hand brushing against her apron pocket. The envelope was still there, pressing against her side like a steady heartbeat. She wasn't ready yet, but the weight of it grew heavier each day she walked these halls. On her way out that evening, she crossed paths with Malik again in the lobby. He looked flustered, papers spilling from his folder. Angela helped him gather them up. "Thank you," he muttered, embarrassed. She placed the stack back in his hands and said softly, "Don't let them see you sweat. You belong here, even if they don't tell you so." Malik nodded, his eyes shining with quiet determination. Angela walked home that night knowing she had planted a small seed, invisible to most, yes, but her presence had begun to matter in ways no one yet understood. The conference room filled quickly, the air thick with tension. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as employees settled uneasily, eyes darting toward the head of the long table. Richard Kane entered without a word, his stride confident, his presence sharp as a blade. He adjusted his cufflinks before resting his hands on the table, surveying the faces before him as though weighing their value in dollars. "Let's not waste time," he said, his tone flat but laced with menace. "This company cannot afford inefficiency any longer. Departments will be evaluated, and anyone failing to prove their worth will be dismissed. Some of you won't be here next month. That's reality." Gasps rippled through the room. A man in sales swallowed hard, his knuckles white as he clenched his pen. A woman in marketing blinked rapidly, fighting tears. The weight of mortgages, medical bills, and tuition fees pressed down on every word Richard spoke. One employee dared to raise a hand. "Mr. Kane, with respect, many of us are already working overtime. We've given years to this company. Isn't there another way?" Richard's lips curved into a cold smile. "Loyalty doesn't pay the bills. Results do. If you can't keep up, you're out." Whispers spread like wildfire across the room. Fear had a sound, shallow breathing, muffled sobs, nervous tapping of pens against notebooks. Angela stood near the corner, her cleaning supplies neatly organized on her cart, her eyes lowered as if absorbed in her task. No one looked at her. To them, she wasn't part of the meeting at all. But she heard every syllable, each one striking her like a hammer. The hand resting at her side brushed against her apron pocket, where the envelope pressed like a hidden truth waiting to be spoken. She didn't reach for it yet, but its presence filled her with both comfort and dread. Richard continued, pacing slowly along the length of the table. "Don't think you're safe because of seniority or past contributions. I expect proof of value now. Anyone who cannot deliver will be replaced by someone who can." At the far end, Malik sat with his notepad open, his pen unmoving. His eyes flicked toward Angela just briefly, as though sensing her stillness carried more weight than the panic around them. He couldn't explain why, but the quiet strength she radiated steadied him. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped again, this time hurriedly. People filed out, whispering frantically. Some clutched their phones, already dialing spouses or friends to share the devastating news. Others simply stared blankly ahead, as though the floor beneath them had shifted. Angela lingered a moment longer, polishing the table slowly, deliberately. Richard brushed past her without a glance, already on his phone, his voice sharp as he discussed numbers, not people. She whispered under her breath, her words too soft for anyone else to hear. Numbers don't keep the lights on in a family's home. Leaving the room, she moved through the hall where clusters of employees gathered. Their conversations overlapped in anxious waves. "I can't afford to lose this job," someone muttered. "My husband just lost his. What am I supposed to do now?" Another cried softly. Angela felt each word pierce her chest. She wanted to tell them she understood, that she carried her own fears too. But she stayed silent, the letter still untouched in her pocket. She knew one thing for certain: Richard Kane's threat wasn't just about layoffs. It was a declaration of power, a message meant to break spirits before the cuts even began. And as Angela walked toward the service elevator, her jaw tightened. She might be invisible to him, but she would not stay silent forever. The letter pressed against her side once more, steady as her heartbeat. Angela's footsteps echoed along Lenox Avenue as dusk settled over Harlem, the sky streaked with deep purples and fading orange. Streetlights flickered on, casting warm pools of light on the sidewalks where vendors packed away their stands and children lingered with basketballs bouncing against cracked pavement. She carried the weight of the day with her, but as the familiar sounds and scents wrapped around her, her spirit eased. Harlem was more than a neighborhood. It was her foundation, her strength. She stopped first at the corner barbershop, its bright neon sign humming softly. Inside, voices rose in friendly arguments about the Knicks' latest game. Mr. Johnson, steady with clippers in hand, called out, "Angela, you walking home from work again, girl? You work too hard." Angela smiled faintly, lowering her bag from her shoulder. "Work don't stop, Mr. Johnson. Bills don't either." The men laughed knowingly, though their laughter carried an edge of truth they all felt. They had seen generations grind to keep food on tables, to make sure the next one climbed higher than the last. Continuing down the street, Angela was drawn by the smell of fried fish drifting from a corner shop, mingling with the rich aroma of collard greens from Miss Clara's diner. She paused at the door, greeted by Clara's booming voice. "Angela Brown, I got fresh cornbread today." "Take some home for Marcus." Angela chuckled, stepping inside for a moment. "You spoil that boy more than I do." Clara waved a dismissive hand. "He's a good one. Got his head on straight. That child's going places." Angela nodded, warmth in her chest at the thought. "That's the plan, Clara. One step at a time." As she left, she passed by her church, its tall brick walls glowing under the streetlights. The door was propped open, and the faint hum of a choir rehearsal drifted into the night. Angela paused, listening to voices rise together in harmony. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. It reminded her of Sundays when she and her sister would sit side by side in the pew, whispering prayers for better days. Her sister, Lillian, had been gone for years now, but her presence lingered in every hymn, every shared memory. Lillian had been bold, outspoken, unwilling to let anyone silence her. It was from her that Angela had inherited the envelope, passed to her in those final weeks with a trembling but determined hand. Angela could still hear her voice. "One day, Angie, you'll know when to use this. Don't let him bury the truth." The memory pressed heavy against Angela's chest as she walked on. She reached her apartment building, its bricks worn, its steps uneven. Inside, Marcus sat at the table with books spread wide, determination etched across his young face. He looked up, grinning when he saw her. "Grandma, I talked to the guidance counselor today. They said if I keep my grades up, I'll have a shot at a scholarship. Angela felt her eyes sting with pride. She set the cornbread on the counter and wrapped her arms around him. That's what I'm talking about, baby. You just keep shining. Grandma's got you. Later, in the quiet of her room, Angela pulled out the letter once again. She traced her sister's handwriting on the envelope, the loops and curves so familiar it almost felt like holding her hand. She whispered into the stillness, "Lillian, I don't know if I'm strong enough." The letter gave no answer, only its steady weight in her palm. Angela tucked it back into her bag, her resolve deepening even as doubt gnawed at her edges. Outside, Harlem hummed with life, its pulse strong, its roots deep. Angela belonged to that rhythm, and it gave her courage. The tension inside Kane International thickened with each passing day. In the executive offices, whispers of discontent threaded their way through closed doors, while on the lower floors, panic simmered just beneath the surface. The employees moved with forced determination, their faces drawn tight, as if every keystroke and phone call might tip the scale of their survival. Richard Kane sat in his office, staring at spreadsheets projected onto a sleek glass screen. Numbers rolled past his eyes, but beneath his calm exterior, even he felt the mounting pressure. The board of directors had scheduled a closed-door meeting, their concerns spilling over in urgent memos. Profits mattered, but chaos did not serve investors. The company's name could not afford to drown in scandal. Laura Green, his trusted assistant, entered with a folder in hand. "Richard, the board wants more clarity," she said, her tone careful. "They're not against cost-cutting, but they're worried about how sudden moves will look. There's talk of leaks to the press." Richard's jaw tightened. "The board has always lacked stomach. They want results, I'll give them results. They'll thank me when the stock price rises." Laura hesitated before responding. "There's more to this than numbers. These are people's lives." Richard snapped his head toward her, his voice sharp. "Don't confuse business with charity. We survive because we act, not because we coddle." She lowered her eyes, but a storm brewed behind them. For the first time in years of loyal service, Laura wondered where her line of loyalty truly stood. Downstairs in the buzzing break room, tension found its voice. Employees gathered in corners, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. "They can't just throw us away like this," muttered James from accounting, pacing with his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. "They can and they will," replied Tanya, her voice heavy, "unless we do something about it." "Do what?" another worker asked, his tone bleak. "You think anyone will stand up to Kane?" The silence that followed said more than words could. Fear strangled courage, yet the seed of resistance had been planted. Angela, mopping near the vending machines, caught their words. She didn't speak, didn't break the rhythm of her mop, but inside her chest the quiet stirrings of determination grew stronger. She had lived long enough to know that change never came without someone daring to push back. Later that afternoon, Malik crossed paths with her in the corridor, his expression tense. Papers jutted out from his folder, his steps restless. "Ms. Angela," he said softly, "is it always like this here? Everybody's scared to death." Angela paused, leaning on her mop handle. She looked him in the eye, her voice calm but edged with truth. "Fear's been around a long time, baby. Folks in charge count on it to keep people quiet. But fear don't last forever. Sooner or later it breaks." Malik nodded slowly, her words sinking deep. His shoulders straightened, though the weight of uncertainty still pressed on him. I don't want to be part of a place that tears people down like this." Angela's gaze softened. "Then you make sure you're part of building something different." That's how we change the story. Their brief exchange lingered with Malik as he walked away, his mind racing with possibilities he hadn't dared imagine before. Meanwhile, Richard Kane prepared his presentation for the board. His plan was ruthless, efficient, calculated to the last decimal point. He saw the company as a battlefield, and he would march forward no matter who fell behind. What he didn't see, what he couldn't yet imagine, was that his greatest challenge wasn't a rival CEO or a downturn in the market. It was already inside his building, quiet and unseen, waiting for the moment to step forward. Night settled heavy over Harlem, wrapping the streets in a hush broken only by the distant rumble of cars and the laughter of teenagers lingering on stoops. Angela sat at her kitchen table, the letter laid out before her like a relic she both longed to open and feared to confront. The paper was worn soft, the seal slightly frayed, but it carried a gravity that no time could diminish. Her hands trembled as she touched her sister's handwriting, Lillian Brown. The loops and curves in her script were so familiar that Angela could almost hear her voice again, sharp but loving. Lillian had always been the brave one, the fighter. Angela had been steady, cautious. Together they had balanced each other until illness took Lillian too soon, leaving Angela with the letter and the promise she wasn't sure she could keep. She closed her eyes, memory pulling her back to the hospital room where her sister had pressed the envelope into her hands. "Don't let him bury it, Angie," Lillian had whispered, her voice raspy but urgent. "Richard Kane took from us, from people like us, and he thinks no one remembers. This proves it. You make sure the world knows." Angela had nodded, tears burning her eyes. At the time, she had thought she would find the courage quickly. Yet years had passed, and the letter had remained unopened, its weight growing heavier with every step she took inside Kane's empire. Marcus shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Grandma, you're still up, it's late." Angela quickly slid the envelope aside, forcing a smile. "Couldn't sleep, baby." "Just thinking too much." He sat across from her, resting his chin in his hands. "Is it about work?" Angela studied his face, the determination in his young eyes. She wanted to shield him from all of it, the greed, the injustice, the weight of battles fought long before he was born. But Marcus was no child anymore. "Something like that," she admitted softly. "Sometimes we carry things that feel too heavy, but we keep carrying because we have to." Marcus reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You've carried me all my life, Grandma. You don't have to do it alone." The words pierced her heart, filling her with both pride and sorrow. She squeezed his hand before sending him back to bed. Alone again, she turned to the letter. When she finally broke the seal, her breath caught. Inside was a series of documents, copies of contracts, records of deals, signatures that bore Richard Kane's name. They detailed labor agreements from decades ago, promises made to workers who had never been paid, families left struggling while Kane's fortune grew. Among them was Lillian's statement, written in her firm hand, recounting the exploitation she had witnessed firsthand when she had worked for his early companies. Angela's chest tightened as she read. Every word confirmed what her sister had told her. Kane's empire wasn't built solely on brilliance or ambition. It was built on betrayal, on the backs of people whose voices had been silenced. She pressed the papers back into the envelope, her mind racing. With this letter, she could expose him. She could bring truth to light, force him to answer for what he had buried. But she also knew the risk. Speaking up meant drawing his wrath, and Kane had destroyed people for far less. Angela leaned back, her hands covering her face, the weight of choice pressed on her like a stone. She thought of Marcus, his dreams shimmering ahead of him, fragile and bright. She thought of her sister, whose last words still echoed in her heart. Finally, she whispered into the quiet, "I can't hide this forever. One day soon, it'll have to be done." And as she tucked the letter back into her bag, Angela knew that day was drawing closer than she had ever allowed herself to admit. The next morning, Angela moved through the gleaming corridors of Kane International with her usual steady pace, her cart rattling softly against the floor tiles. Yet inside, her thoughts churned. The letter, now opened and read, weighed heavier than ever. Every time she glanced at Richard Kane's name stamped on a contract, every time she heard his voice echo down the halls, she felt the truth burning in her chest. She was polishing the brass handles outside the finance wing when Malik appeared, his tie slightly askew and his folder stuffed with loose papers. He looked frazzled, his forehead damp with nerves. "Morning, Miss." "Angela?" he said, forcing a smile. Angela returned it gently. "Morning, baby. You running late?" "Feels like I'm always running late," he admitted with a sigh. "No matter how hard I work, I can't shake the feeling I don't belong here." Angela leaned on her cart, studying him with kind but steady eyes. "Don't you believe that? Places like this are built to make folks like us feel small." "But you're not small, you hear me?" Malik nodded, though doubt still shadowed his face. "You always sound so sure of yourself. How do you do it?" Angela hesitated, her hand brushing the apron pocket where the letter rested. "You keep standing because you know somebody before you already stood. My sister used to say that. You hold on to what they left behind and you keep walking." Malik tilted his head, curiosity flickering. "Your sister, she worked here too." Angela's lips pressed into a thin line. Not here, but close enough. She saw things, knew things. People like Kane would rather stay buried. Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied it. "One day the truth comes knocking. That's something no man can stop." Malik didn't press further, sensing the edge in her tone. Instead, he leaned closer and whispered, "Some of us have been talking about standing together if layoffs come, but people are scared. Nobody wants to be the first." Angela's eyes softened. Scared is normal. Courage ain't the absence of fear. It's moving even while you're scared. His shoulders straightened a little at her words. "Maybe we just need someone to remind us of that." Before Angela could reply, Laura Green walked briskly down the hall. She gave Malik a curt nod before her gaze lingered on Angela for a beat too long. Unlike most executives, Laura didn't look through her. There was a searching quality in her eyes, as if she sensed Angela carried more than her mop and cart. Angela quickly turned back to her work, but the feeling stayed. Later in the break room, Malik found Angela again. He spoke in a low voice, careful of the employees drifting in and out. "I don't know what it is, Miss Angela, but I think you're holding something important." "I can see it in the way you look at him." At Kane. Angela's heart raced. For a moment she considered brushing it off, deflecting with humor. Instead, she met his eyes. "What I carry ain't light. It could shake more than you know, and once it's out, there's no going back." Malik swallowed hard. "Then maybe that's exactly what we need." Angela didn't answer, but the faintest flicker of hope stirred inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone had noticed. Someone believed in her strength before she even fully believed in it herself. As she pushed her cart out of the room, Angela felt Laura's gaze follow her once again from the far corner. And for the first time, she wondered if quiet allies might be gathering where she least expected them. The following week brought a restless tension that clung to every hallway of Kane International. Rumors moved faster than the elevators, spreading from cubicles to break rooms, from whispered phone calls to quiet corners in the cafeteria. People spoke in hushed voices, but the fear was unmistakable. Mass layoffs were no longer just a threat. They were imminent. Richard Kane thrived in the unease. He stood before his office window one morning, surveying the city as if it were his kingdom. Behind him, Laura delivered updates with measured words. "Employees are growing restless," she said. "There's talk of pushback. Some are organizing to challenge the cuts." Richard turned, his expression a mix of disdain and amusement. "Let them. A lion doesn't concern himself with the bleating of sheep." Laura's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Downstairs, the workers whispered in growing urgency. James from accounting drafted emails to colleagues. Tanya quietly researched labor attorneys, and groups gathered in stairwells, weighing their chances of fighting back. The atmosphere was heavy, but beneath the fear, something else stirred. Resolve. Angela noticed it as she moved through the building with her cart. People looked at each other differently now, not just as co-workers but as fellow survivors of a storm. She caught snippets of conversations, plans for petitions, talk of calling reporters, determination to no longer suffer in silence. That night, Angela sat at her kitchen table with the envelope open once again. The documents stared back at her, damning and undeniable. She whispered to herself, "It's more than me now. It's all of us." Marcus entered quietly, carrying his notebook. "Grandma, you're up late again." Angela gave a tired smile. "Couldn't sleep." He pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You know, when I was little, you used to tell me stories about our family. about how folks didn't give up no matter how hard it got. You said courage runs in our blood. Angela's throat tightened. She reached over, brushing a hand across his cheek. That's right, baby. It does. Marcus studied the papers on the table, though he didn't ask questions. Instead, he said softly, "Whatever's weighing on you, you don't have to face it alone." Her heart ached at his words. She tucked the documents back into the envelope, pressing her palm against it, as if sealing away its power for just a little longer. The next morning, Malik found her in the service corridor, his expression serious. "Miss Angela," he said quietly, "people are scared, but they're ready. If someone took the first step, others would follow." Angela looked into his determined young eyes and saw the reflection of her own fear and her own strength. "You sure about that, baby?" she asked softly. "Yes, Mom," Malik said, his voice steady. "Sometimes it takes just one person to remind everybody else what they're worth." Angela's hand brushed her apron pocket, where the envelope rested like a hidden heartbeat. She didn't answer, but Malik saw the flicker in her gaze and understood. Upstairs, Richard Kane finalized his announcement, drafting the speech that would cement his authority. He rehearsed words like efficiency, growth, and necessary cuts, never once considering the lives behind them. To him, it was strategy. To everyone else, it was devastation. Angela, pushing her cart down the hall, passed his office door. She heard his voice rehearsing, sharp and practiced, and a shiver ran through her, but instead of shrinking, she straightened her back. The time for silence was slipping away. By the end of that day, the building hummed with restless anticipation. Richard was ready to strike, the employees were ready to resist, and Angela Brown, invisible to most, carried in her pocket the letter that could unravel it all. The conference room brimmed with unease as employees filed in, their voices hushed, their faces tense. Papers shuffled nervously, and the faint hum of the air conditioning felt louder than usual. Richard Kane stood at the head of the table, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He enjoyed these moments, holding power over a room full of people desperate to keep their lives from crumbling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying authority that demanded silence, "today marks the beginning of a necessary transition. Efficiency is the lifeblood of success. Some of you will not meet the standard required for this company's future." A murmur rippled through the crowd, panic tightening the air. One employee whispered, "He's really doing it." Another clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. Malik, sitting near the end of the table, leaned forward, his jaw tense. Angela stood in her usual corner, polishing a glass surface with slow, deliberate movements. To everyone else, she was just part of the background, the silent figure who came and went unnoticed. But inside, her heart thundered, each beat echoing against the envelope in her pocket. Richard continued, his tone cruelly casual. "Loyalty is admirable, but it does not guarantee your place here. Results do. If you cannot keep up, you will be replaced." Angela set down her cloth and straightened her shoulders. The silence that followed his words pressed heavy, but she stepped forward, her voice calm yet unyielding. "Mr. Kane." Heads turned. Some employees blinked in disbelief. The maid was speaking. Richard raised an eyebrow, his lip curling into a smirk. "Yes? What is it? Spill something, did you?" Laughter flickered among a few executives, nervous and mocking. Angela held his gaze, steady as stone. "No, sir, I didn't spill anything. I have something for you." Richard's smirk deepened. "And what could that be? A cleaning report?" Angela reached into her apron pocket and withdrew the envelope. The room stilled, the weight of the moment settling like a sudden storm. She walked the length of the table, each step deliberate, and placed the letter directly in front of Richard Kane. His amusement faltered. "What is this?" "Something you should have faced a long time ago," Angela replied, her voice low but clear. Richard tore open the envelope with irritation, his eyes scanning the first page. The arrogance on his face wavered as he read. His fingers stiffened on the paper, and a flush crept up his neck. Employees exchanged confused glances, whispering to each other. Malik leaned closer, trying to see Richard's reaction. Laura, standing near the door, narrowed her eyes, sensing the tide shifting. Richard slammed the papers down, his voice sharp. "Where did you get this?" Angela met his glare without flinching. "It doesn't matter where. What matters is it's true. You built your fortune by cheating people who trusted you, people like my sister. And you thought no one would ever hold you accountable." The room fell silent, the tension electric. No one dared move, yet every ear strained to catch each word. Richard's hands shook slightly, though he tried to mask it with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. These are old records, irrelevant." Angela's eyes narrowed. "Irrelevant to you, maybe, not to the people you left behind. Not to the families you robbed of their wages while you climbed to the top." Gasps echoed around the room. Malik's eyes widened, his chest swelling with a rush of vindication. For years, Richard Kane had been untouchable, and now, a maid, the woman no one ever saw, was forcing him to face the truth. Angela stepped back, her voice steady. "You can threaten these workers all you want, but you can't silence the truth." The room buzzed with shock, fear, and the first glimmers of courage. For the first time, Richard Kane was not the one controlling the room. Richard's fingers tightened around the papers, his knuckles whitening as his eyes darted across the pages. Every line carried the weight of his past: contracts signed, promises broken, wages withheld. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. A woman from marketing whispered, "What is it?" Her voice cracked under the pressure of not knowing. Richard's jaw clenched. This is nonsense, fabricated." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Angela folded her hands in front of her, steady as stone. "Those documents are real. My sister worked for one of your early companies. She saw the way you cheated your workers, how you left them with nothing while you climbed higher. She wrote her testimony with her own hand, and she kept records. You thought it would disappear, but it didn't." Gasps spread through the room. Employees leaned forward, eyes wide, as if a veil had been lifted. Malik's gaze locked on Angela with awe, his heart pounding. Laura stepped closer, her eyes scanning the documents from where she stood. "These look official," she said slowly, her tone sharper than Richard expected. "If this gets out, the damage to the company—" "Enough!" Richard snapped, slamming his fist on the table. The papers rattled, but the sound only underscored his unraveling. His composure, once unshakable, cracked before the very people he had sought to intimidate. Angela's voice remained calm. "You called these people numbers, but those numbers were families. My sister was one of them. She died carrying the burden of what you did, and now her voice is speaking through me." The room buzzed with murmurs. Some employees exchanged glances filled with fury, others with dawning courage. Malik rose slowly from his chair. "All this time, you told us we were replaceable, but you're the one who built this company on lies. You wouldn't be sitting in that chair if not for the people you cheated." Richard turned on him, his glare venomous. "You don't know what you're saying, boy." But Malik didn't flinch. His voice grew stronger. "I know enough, and I know she's telling the truth." He gestured to Angela, his words fueling the growing energy in the room. "You can't bury this anymore." The tension swelled, pressing in from every side. Richard's shoulders heaved with fury, but the fear in his eyes betrayed the truth he couldn't suppress. He knew those documents could not simply vanish. They were proof of his corruption, the foundation of his empire. Laura crossed her arms, her voice cold. "If even part of this leaks, the board won't stand by you. Investors will flee. This isn't something you can buy your way out of, Richard." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. For once, the master of every room, the man whose voice dictated destinies, stood speechless. Angela stepped closer, her tone firm but quiet. "You wanted to scare these people into silence, but now they know the truth, and truth is louder than fear." The employees erupted in murmurs, no longer whispers of panic, but voices rising with a mix of shock and emboldened defiance. The spell of intimidation was broken. Richard stared at the papers again, his reflection glaring back at him in the polished table. For the first time he looked smaller, his power slipping through his fingers like sand. Angela returned to her corner, but she no longer felt invisible. The room had shifted, The truth was out and nothing could put it back in the shadows. The conference room had shifted from silence to a storm of murmurs. What began as cautious whispers now swelled into voices gaining courage, as if Angela's words had unlocked something long buried in each of them. Fear still lingered, but it no longer commanded the room. Tanya from marketing rose to her feet, her hands trembling yet her voice firm. For years we've worked late nights, weekends, sacrificing our families for this company. And what did we get? Threats, disrespect. Now we know why. This empire was never clean. James from accounting pushed his chair back, his jaw clenched. I lost friends in those early years, men who never got their pay, families who had to move out of Harlem because of broken promises. And you knew, Kane. You knew. Richard's face flushed red, but he forced a smirk. You're all fools if you think the world cares about old grievances. Business is about winners and losers. I won. You should be grateful you even had the chance to ride along. The words backfired. The employees erupted, not with applause but with defiance. Malik stood, his young voice cutting through the clamor with clarity and conviction. Grateful? You think we should be grateful for being used, for being treated like we're disposable? His chest rose and fell with controlled fury. This company doesn't exist without the people in this room and the people you cheated to get here, and now that truth is out. Heads nodded. Murmurs of agreement swelled into a chorus. Someone shouted, "That's right." Another added, "We're done being silent." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Sit down, all of you. You think you can challenge me? I built this from nothing." Angela stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying across the room. "You didn't build it alone. You built it on the backs of people you thought were too powerless to fight back. But look around you, Mr. Kane. You're outnumbered." Laura, who had remained by the door, finally spoke, her tone cold and steady. "Richard, you've lost control of this room. And if you've lost this room, you've lost the company. The board will hear about this, the investors too. They won't stand by you when the truth spreads." Richard's breath quickened. He scanned the faces turned against him, faces no longer bent by fear, but lit with resolve. For the first time he realized that intimidation alone would not hold them. Angela folded her arms. "We've all been silent too long. My sister's voice is here with us now, but she's not the only one. Every person you dismissed, every family you hurt, they're part of this moment. You can't bury us all." The employees responded with a low rumble of agreement, their voices overlapping, feeding each other strength. Some recorded the exchange on their phones. Others stood shoulder to shoulder, a physical wall of resistance. Malik's voice rose again, clear and unshakable. "We're not just workers. We're people, and we won't let you strip away our dignity anymore." Angela looked at him, pride shining in her eyes. His courage was the echo of her sister's words, carried forward in a new generation. Richard's hands shook as he tried to gather the papers, but they slipped, scattering across the table. He was no longer the unshakable figure towering over the room. The power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Angela's gaze never wavered. "The truth is out, Mr. Kane, and truth doesn't bow to money." The room erupted in agreement, louder this time, a collective voice refusing to be silenced. For the first time in his empire's history, Richard Kane stood cornered, not by competitors or markets, but by the very people he had underestimated. The atmosphere in the conference room had transformed. What had once been Richard Kane's domain now pulsed with a different energy, one that no longer bent to his will. Employees stood taller, their voices overlapping in determination, while Richard clutched the papers with trembling hands. His empire, built on intimidation, was slipping from his grasp. Laura stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Richard," she said, her voice crisp, "you've lost their trust, and without their trust this company is nothing but empty walls and broken contracts. The board won't tolerate this." Richard glared at her, his face reddening. "You think you can turn against me after everything?" Laura met his fury without flinching. "I'm not turning against you, Richard. You did that to yourself." A murmur of approval rippled across the room. The employees watched, their courage swelling. Malik took a step forward, his youthful voice steady. "If this company is going to survive, It needs change, real change. Diversity in leadership, protections for workers, a seat at the table for the people who keep this place alive. Angela's chest swelled with quiet pride as she watched him. His words carried the weight of generations before him, echoing the prayers and struggles of their community. Richard's laugh was hollow, desperate. You think you can run a company with feelings? Business doesn't bend to your ideals, it crushes them. Angela's voice cut through his mockery, calm but sharp. Business without humanity crumbles, Mr. Kane. That's what you're seeing right now. The words struck harder than any shout could. Richard faltered, his gaze sweeping over the employees, no longer silent, no longer afraid. Their unity was a force he couldn't buy, couldn't threaten into submission. James from accounting spoke up. We're done being silent. Either things change, or we'll take this beyond these walls. Reporters will hear, the public will hear, and once they do, your empire won't stand. Others chimed in, voices overlapping in agreement. The collective sound rose, filling the room with power that no single individual could muster alone. Richard stumbled back, his confidence unraveling. He turned to Laura, desperate now. You can't let them do this. You've been with me for years. But Laura's expression remained steady. I stayed because I believed in this company, not in you. And now I see clearly. If there's a future here, it won't be with you leading it. The room erupted in applause, not loud but firm, a rhythm of unity. Richard, once the towering presence at the head of the table, now looked small, isolated, a man cornered by the very voices he had dismissed. Angela took a step forward, her eyes locked on his. You tried to erase people like my sister. You thought no one would remember, but we do, and we're still here. The weight of her words pressed into him, his shoulders slumping as though the truth itself had crushed him. He opened his mouth, but no defense came. The silence that followed was not his command anymore. It belonged to those who had found their voices. Malik glanced at Angela, his eyes bright with determination. This is only the beginning, he said softly, though everyone heard him. Angela nodded, the faintest smile touching her lips. The balance had shifted. Richard Kane's empire would never be the same again, and for the first time, the workers of Kane International felt the ground solid beneath their feet. The city lights glowed across Harlem as Angela walked home that evening, the air cool against her skin. The noise of Manhattan still echoed in her ears, the voices of workers who had stood together, the sound of truth cutting through years of silence. For the first time in a long time, she felt a lightness in her step. At her apartment, Marcus was waiting with books spread across the table. He looked up as she entered, his smile bright. Grandma, you're home. Guess what? The community center director called today. They want to nominate me for a scholarship program. Angela's breath caught, her eyes filling with warmth. A scholarship? Yeah, Marcus said, excitement spilling from him. They said I've been working hard and they want to support me. I might actually get to go to Howard, Grandma. Angela pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly. Baby, you deserve every bit of it, you hear me? Every bit. Her heart swelled with pride. Everything she had carried, every sacrifice, every silent battle. This was what it was for. Her sister's memory, her community's resilience, her grandson's future. It was all tied together. Later that week, the streets of Harlem buzzed with news of what had happened at Kane International. In barbershops and cafes, people spoke Angela's name with respect. That woman stood up to him, they said. She reminded all of us what courage looks like. At Miss Clara's diner, Angela sat with her old friend over cornbread and sweet tea. Clara patted her hand. You did what needed doing. Your sister would be proud, Angela smiled softly. I didn't do it alone. Everybody in that room found their voices. I just carried the letter. Clara nodded. Sometimes carrying is the hardest part. Meanwhile, Malik stepped into a new role. The board, pressured by the uproar, began restructuring, and Malik's voice was sought out in discussions about the company's future. He often thought of Angela's words, courage ain't the absence of fear, and carried them into every meeting determined to shape something better. As for Richard Kane, The man who once towered over everyone, he was left facing the board, investors, and the public. His arrogance had cracked, his empire exposed. No one pitied him. He was not destroyed overnight, but the illusion of untouchable power was gone, and he would never command the same fear again. One Sunday morning, Angela walked with Marcus to church, the bells ringing across the neighborhood. As they stepped inside, the choir's voices rose, filling the sanctuary with harmony. Angela closed her eyes, her heart lifting. She felt her sister's presence there, not as a burden now, but as a blessing. After the service, Marcus turned to her. "Grandma, you know what I think? You didn't just stand up to him. You showed me that no matter how small people think we are, we can change something." Angela's eyes glistened as she looked at him. "That's the truth, baby. Don't ever forget it." As they walked home under the autumn sun, Harlem hummed with life around them, kids playing on stoops, music drifting from windows, neighbors greeting one another warmly. Angela felt at peace, her steps steady, her spirit strong. She had been invisible once. Now she was seen, not just as a maid, but as a woman who carried her family's legacy, her community's strength, and the truth that could never again be silenced. And just like that, her story became more than her own. It became a reminder to everyone listening. No empire is too great to fall when ordinary voices rise together. So, if you've walked this journey with Angela, don't stop here. Subscribe now for more stories that honor courage, resilience, and truth, and click the video waiting for you on the screen to keep the inspiration alive.